top cybersecurity concepts to apply to reduce threat vulnerabilities as you scale. What do you guys think about, like, what should you be focusing on as you go from small business to bigger business?
Shift left and safe defaults. So I'm going to go with that. So what I mean by shift left, right, is if you can architect a solution that removes an attack vector, do it. So let's say you are a small business and you currently have people managing resources in a data center somewhere, and it's normal for people to SSH into those boxes. And okay, cool. Like small team, you can probably handle this with local accounts even on the Linux servers that they're SSHing to. But even then, let's assume you're not using keys, you're using passwords. Like that is one level of security, and you have to deal with brute force attacks. If you move to something like key-based authentication using things like SSH keys as you grow, now you make it so that an attacker can't brute force because there's no password. You've eliminated an attack vector that way, but you can still steal the credentials if you compromise a developer server. So that's bad, but you can then go, and then they can reuse that on any server. But then you go one step further and you say, okay, cool, well, let's do certificate-based authentication from only hosts that are allowed. The certificate belongs to the developer machine, and we can validate that it's actually from the machine. And let's also turn on MFA while we're there. So now, somebody, in order to compromise that server, and again, you make this the standard now. All SSH access is handled by like machine certs, and you have MFA or something like that. If that's the standard, you've removed key theft as a viable option because you still need MFA. You've removed brute force as a vector because you don't use passwords. So when you take that approach and you think about like, let's just design a secure mechanism from the beginning, it can really help you scale because you're just eliminating entire vectors. And that's what shift left means too, is like to bring it to the beginning, to your architecture design phase, and actually build it out with security in mind. That'll be my cybersecurity concept that I think helps the most with scaling. Because then you can go really quickly. Once that's your standard, you can have 1 million developers. It doesn't matter. You can revoke certificates and you cut off access as the example.
Yeah, so this kind of ties into a little bit of what we talked about last week when we were saying, like, or whatever week it was that we recorded, where it was, how early in the development or in the growth of your company should you worry about cybersecurity? And I said basically like, when it makes sense, and everybody else said something along the lines of as early as you possibly can. And that's kind of what Jeff just said right there, like shift left, as in left on the timeline, and start soon with sane, secure defaults. And yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. The interesting, or like the hitch in that to me, I guess, is just that when your team is small, right? If you're like a small dev shop building a product and you've got 5 developers and they're all just on the keyboard making stuff, who's your security expert at that point in time? Honestly, Jeff, like a lot of the stuff you said, kind of it's all going to be rooted in policy, right? Like your SSH connection from development machines to like, either production servers or database servers or whatever, all that type of stuff it's all grounded in policy at the end of the day. And when it comes to like you're growing your team from like 5 to 10 people or 10 to 20 people, and you maybe don't have a security expert, who should be the expert that's writing your policy? Should you just outsource that and pull it in from somewhere else? Should you hire a security expert now to write policy, like a CISO kind of level or a CIO kind of level? Like, I guess that would be my follow on. Like, I totally agree with you. Do it as early as possible with sane, foundational, secure defaults. That's like literally the only thing you really can do to scale securely, unless you want to bring in consultants or something like that maybe to help. But if you're going to do it in-house, that's really it. For me, the question is, who's the responsible party, or do you have to be able to recognize your own weakness, your own gap, and have the humility or the self-awareness basically to say, I need somebody to help me through that?
I think it depends on an organization and like organizational culture, right? Like if you're truly a 5-person dev shop, like you don't have dedicated security staff.
Exactly.
You maybe are outsourcing. So really the question is like, at what point? The answer is I don't have a good answer for you there. I think every company handles it differently. Some are going to outsource. Some are going to go to MSSPs and hope that they just kind of handle security. But if you're making the conscious decision that you are transitioning from one size of business to another, and you are asking how do you scale security, like if that's the conversation you're having, you're probably at the point where if no one else in the company is the security person, like the person asking that question just kind of became the de facto security person, because they're thinking that way as the company continues to grow. And if the leadership of the company buys off on that, then like that's the point. That's the inflection point when you recognize your potential areas for improvement and raise the question.
And then you just kind of hope that either that guy's smart enough to know it all or smart enough to know that he doesn't know it all, I suppose.
Yep. And then the company and then the business, right, has to get behind that. And if they don't, then, you're not going to have a business that wants to prioritize security, like, in any way.
And that, kids, is where technical debt comes from. Okay.
Yep.
Nick, did you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, no, I just, I was interested to see what Jeff would think, I guess, kind of about what we talked about last time a little bit, or one of the times that we recorded, where how do we as security professionals help the smaller guys or these startups, these smaller businesses to understand that security should be incorporated in the beginning, or should be incorporated from that left side sooner in your process, right? So from my perspective, a lot of these companies that are being built, or even some mid-sized companies, still don't even consider security as a priority, because they're like, hey, we're fine, we're not a target, we're not going to be hacked, we're always going to be good, right? And we all know that's not the case. So how do we as security professionals better inform these smaller companies that security is crucial for them to grow?
Yeah, so for that, I think it comes back to kind of like that CISO view of, like, you have to talk about the problem in terms of an appreciable business risk. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for us, depending on the company we're talking to, like, as security professionals. So trying to think of a really good instance here. Let's assume you have like a really small mom and pop shop. They're a bakery, okay? You have the bakery that has literally 3 employees, and the only piece of technology in the entire shop is their point of sale, like, Square payment terminal, okay? So realistically, threat modeling that, how is that going to be attacked? Like, what's the negative here? What are the potential security problems that they have as, like, a very small business? And like, talking about that, it's, okay, realistically, you can't take payments is a worst case scenario that is not implausible based off of that. Like, what happens if your iPad gets malware? What happens if your account gets compromised and you no longer are have control of your Square account, where the money's going? And now if you say somebody, okay, cool, you can't take payments for a week, for 2 weeks. How long can your business go if you can't make sales? Is like that incredibly small scenario. But then you go to a bigger one, and let's assume it's a small law firm that has, 50 staff. And maybe they've outsourced everything, and they're just assuming that, it's going well, but they've never actually verified security. They've never thought about security, really, because it's just handled by the MSSP, or it's just handled by Microsoft, let's say. Real world example, don't be crazy, make up 0-day vulnerabilities that don't exist. But, okay, great, you're using Outlook. Known vulnerabilities in Outlook come up occasionally. So realistically, you don't have to be a target, because, again, with these type of vulnerabilities, especially if you're using a provider, it's all the customers who are affected, and it's just targets of opportunity. So you kind of show them the data there to say you don't have to be a target. And now what's the risk? The risk is, okay, your email's compromised. It's all your case files, if that's where you do it, or all your communication, or all your invoices. And then you talk about, like, damage to reputation. Are you now liable for legal action to be held against you? How many of these cases can you withstand? And, like, just turning it back to, like, what's the information they care about? Do they actually have risk? And just getting them to think through or talk through those scenarios starts the conversation. And again, you're not going to convince somebody they immediately are going to do everything. They're just going to shift left all the things, and they're going to redo their infrastructure and redo their IAM and redo their onboarding processes. Like, that's not going to happen. The goal, like, for us as security practitioners, going back to your question, to get small businesses engaged in this, isn't to solve security for them, because if it was solvable, we would have done it and we'd all be billionaires. It's to get them thinking about security and talking about security more, because it's that kind of continuous journey, or whatever, to be cheesy about it.
Yeah, I mean, Nick, the question that I kind of heard when you asked it, which I'm totally putting words in your mouth, is how do we make everybody in the world care about security as much as, we care about security, kind of at its core? Because anyone can start a business, anyone can start a bakery, anyone can start a, whatever they want. And so, like, how do we bring that up? And, like, one thing I guess I've noticed is in the news, for example, maybe like when there's a huge breach, right? All they talk about is like how bad that was or how many people were affected. They love throwing huge stats and stuff, but very rarely do they like bring a cybersecurity expert on and say like something to the effect of like, so what can small companies actually do to protect against this? Or like what, or should they even care? Is it totally out of their hands and they're just along for the ride, or like any of that type of stuff? I guess we're probably as professionals not going out and like shouting from the mountaintops enough, maybe. I don't know, CNN, if you want to call me to like come on your next breach or whatever, like whatever. But Yeah, it's kind of hard just because like Jeff said, there are companies that exist that their risk is like, okay, it's totally out of my. What do you want me to do about it? I have Stripe. I have a login on Stripe. If Stripe goes down, how should I even worry about that? Because what am I going to do? But there is definitely something to be said about like a bakery that suddenly has 40 franchises and is growing. Like all of a sudden your problems are more severe. And like how do we make everybody in the world understand that cybersecurity is a part of every single person's life to a degree, just because risk in general is a part of your life no matter what. So yeah, I don't know, like Nick, you want to get your megaphone out with me or anything like that? But yeah, it's a good question. It definitely is a good question.
I mean, I don't think it's that easy of a solution. We kind of talked about it the last time a little bit. If you're going with that phrasing, right? I like how Jeff went after it. But if we're going like, hey, the whole world needs to know security. I mean, we've already talked about people are inherently trusting, and we don't believe that the worst is going to happen to us until it does, right? So I think it's always going to be an uphill battle for cybersecurity professionals to get the word out there of how important it is to organizations that don't even understand security is a risk to them at the moment, right? So that's kind of where I'm at on that topic.
Yeah, I feel that most people I talk to, with anything, right, just like their data being sold, through social media or whatever, like everyone just, to me, the whole vibe from everybody is just, yeah, we're just along for the ride. My identity has been stolen 6 times, and whatever. I just call my credit card company and cancel the charges and move on with my life. It's just a part of, like, is it just a part of life now that people are going to be breached and like the best thing you can do is teach them to respond? Or like should everyday people be more trained in response or in mitigation? I'm not really sure. And what does that mean from a personal perspective or just a business perspective, like especially if you're running a small business that you're trying to scale? To me, response is very overlooked across the board. Business, like major businesses and small businesses and individuals, response is like something no one talks about because they just figure it out when it happens to them, I guess. But mitigation also, has its place for sure.
No, I'd agree. I want to say one other thing on that. I think as a profession or like as a topic, right, security is difficult in a way that some other disciplines aren't. And what I mean by that is like, what makes someone a cybersecurity expert? What makes someone you can trust in this field?
Oh, you just go to LinkedIn.
Right?
Yeah.
No, but I mean, like seriously, that is a problem that we deal with. There's, a recognized, shortage of talent. There's a recognized problem to solve. And so as a result, like one cybersecurity expert does not equal another cybersecurity expert. And not just that, but you can have 2 experts with polar opposite views on a topic, and neither is like technically wrong. Like you're not going to have 2 heart surgeons who are like, oh, you need a valve replacement, and oh, you don't need a valve replacement. Like normally, if they've diagnosed it, that's the serious surgery you need. Like you get a second opinion because most of the time it agrees with, and you're just kind of hoping that there's maybe some other case, but like that's not the way in cybersecurity. Like, and that makes it hard. How do you get people behind something when it's already complicated? It's already difficult for them to understand. You don't know who to trust, and oh, by the way, even if you know who to trust, there's multiple answers.
Yeah, a medical profession. Yeah, we're all stubborn. But yeah, a medical professional's second opinion is more likely to reconfirm what you know. Yeah, you're totally right. I think they're not 100% of the time, but there are definitely, it's probably more likely that you talk to a second opinion in a cybersecurity firm and they will just completely undercut whatever the other guy said. And some of that's like vendor bias. Some of that is like, oh, don't use AWS because I used AWS and got hacked one time, so use Azure instead. And you can't agree because you're not technically wrong in either case. Yeah, I totally buy into that.
And if you're talking about businesses, like there's definitely a race to the bottom when it comes to choosing bidders, which is a thing.
Yeah.
Like, so you're not, most people going in for major surgery aren't going to try to find the budget surgeon. Like they're going to try to find the one that's not going to kill them. But for cybersecurity, that's just not the case. It's good enough. We met compliance. We put the check in the box. A lot of companies don't care about the quality of the work. So that's another compounding factor.
Yeah, because the quality of the work doesn't really matter. I think we've accepted that like breaches are going to, like, and to a degree it's true, but breaches are going to happen. So all we have for a lot of businesses coming in is like that race to the bottom where all they need is the report that said they did their due diligence so they don't get sued. They really probably in a lot of cases could care less, like at the end of the day, because they just don't think it's going to happen to them anyway. So yeah, that race to the bottom and like the compliance and just the consequences just aren't quite there the same way they are for a heart surgery, you know.
I kind of hope that would change, right? So I kind of hope that would, and I hate to say this, but I kind of hope that all the ransomware that's going on would change the risk posture and the acceptance of risk with most organizations, right? Where they're not just compliance, because if you look at it, a lot of the breaches until ransomware was a thing, it was like taking its foothold was, hey, we stole all your customer information, which doesn't really affect you, just your reputation, but it affects your customers, right? Well, now if you get ransomware, I mean, it could be affecting your bottom line, right? And so I was hoping that we would see a change with all the ransomware that's out there of, oh, okay, well, this is affecting our bottom line now. We should take this more serious than just the checkbox.
Yeah, well, with the most recent like string of ransomware attacks where there actually really was real consequences, like with the pipeline and with that like meat plant in North Dakota or wherever it was, it's funny because all of a sudden there were real consequences, and then guess what? That shop hung up and ran off because they were in trouble finally. I think these ransomware actors have been pretty smart to pick targets that don't bother people, you know, or don't bother enough people for it to matter. That has been very smart in their tactics, like in their overall strategy to not go after, you know, the NSA or the nuclear launch codes. Like the guys who are smart enough to pull it off at this point are also smart enough to know who to target. I don't know, maybe when you can speak ransomware into existence with that, you know, link we were talking about earlier, we'll have idiots, you know, hit the nuclear launch codes, and then all of a sudden, you know, everybody will take it seriously. But it's almost like they've played this like weird game where it's like we actually aren't going for the big targets. We're not getting greedy, because once we go broke, you know, we go big, we're gonna go home, kind of thing.
Wasn't that Revel's like response, or RE, whatever you guys say their name? Wasn't that the response to the pipeline was, hey, we don't want to take down, like, yeah, we don't mean to, we don't want to take down anything that affects people, we just want to make money.
Yeah, I mean, that really was their response. I remember hearing something about that where they were very much like apologetic for doing too well, kind of. And yeah, I mean, I think you're right that if it just hasn't been taken seriously enough, it could have been maybe, but honestly, the reason it wasn't was because not enough hospitals have been ransomware yet, or not enough, you know, critical infrastructure. No power plants have been held for a week, you know, yet. Most of the time those just fall apart on their own these days, it sounds like. But yeah, no, I mean, you're right. You're very right. We'll see what happens when people can speak ransomware into existence, maybe.
I just don't know how else you change it, right? If you're not affecting a business's bottom line, they're always going to just be like, checkbox, cool, we're good, right?
Yeah, well, data is infinite, you know, so people stealing data from a company, that company's like, great, I still have my data. You know, if you walk into a bank and you steal a bunch of gold bars, all of a sudden that bank, you know, is responsible to get those back, but data just doesn't work that way. It's at the same, it's a valuable product without any scarcity. Like, the economics of it are entirely unique.
So I'm going to speak in an area that I'm not the biggest expert in. I'm a semi-expert here, right? The founder of Zero Trust, to throw around some buzzwords, John Kindervag, actually has a really good view on this, and I don't disagree with him. Ryan, you pointed out that the economics around data are really weird. So his view, and other people's views, is that data should be treated as a toxic substance. And we see this with GDPR and a couple other requirements where you can be fined, like, for each instance of, you know, affected user data, let's say, or affected citizen data that gets leaked, up to like 20% of your entire gross revenue as a penalty. So I think that that's one thing, is even if it doesn't affect the company directly, like ransomware, it's just data breaches, you make it so that breaches cost more. And then this should incentivize, and hopefully, like, if you adopt and shift left, right, going back to earlier, you then are kind of forced to say, I'm only going to collect the bare minimum information I need to do my job. I'm going to actually do things like tokenize this. We're going to de-anonymize it as much as possible. We're going to try to, you know, do more abstraction on the data. And you basically make it expensive for companies to have data they don't need. I think that approach, where you're basically designing into the data you're collecting and then storing, like, the toxicity. Removal of, you make it toxic. And I think that that's a really good approach and way to potentially help solve this. And then the impetus, as far as Nick's original statement, is massive regulatory fines.
Mm-hmm.
Can we have a GDPR USA?
I'd be fine with that.
I mean, I'd be fine with it. I'm just asking, can we do it? Like, is it
Oh.
even in the realm of possibility? I just don't. It's so. I mean, California kind of did their own. New York kind of did their own.
Colorado got theirs now, but I mean, it's
I
all
wanna-
politics.
Yeah, and what are these companies supposed to do? Have 50 different compliance? Well, plus Europe, so 51. You know, it's ooh. Is someone going to come in and just swing the federal stick at it? I'm not sure yet. Do we have states just like kind of join confederacies? Well, that's a bad word. Co-ops, I suppose, where like maybe 5 states all agree and sign up to the same one, because like maybe regionally or culturally, like in different parts of the country, like you can pull that off as opposed to painting the whole coast to coast with one brush. I don't really know how this. I don't really know how the states ones necessarily like line for line correlate with GDPR if they're carbon copies, or I'm not an expert on that. But do either of you guys know? Does anybody know?
I don't know, but I would say that I think that anything short of federal would almost certainly be just contested within our country.
It would just fail. Yeah.
Yeah. The second that like California tries to fine, I don't know, Riot Games $1 billion, Riot's just going to be like, okay, we're going to the federal Supreme Court and saying that your law, the state law, is unconstitutional or something. You have to have this would have to be at the highest level that like we're too litigious.
Yeah, because every single time it's going to go to interstate trade immediately. Yep. Yeah, and then up to the Supreme Court, and then who knows? It's a coin flip at that point for sure.